Okay. Good morning. Good morning, Lariza. Welcome. We're glad to have you here at Beth Meyer's Zoom link.
Good morning. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for inviting me.
We're so honored. Well, we have here at Beth Meyer the wonderful leadership of one of our great volunteers, Alice Scher. We've been involved with the Episcopal Farmworkers Ministry for many years. I mean, easily over a decade. I've been here for 16 years, most of that time. We also remember, and we talked before, Lariza, before this conversation, that I actually had the privilege of visiting the Farmworker Ministry in Bowie's Creek area, like around there, if I remember correctly. And I met Father Rojas, who you explained to me he's now retired, but he was such a beautiful, warm soul and a real blessing. And he actually spoke at our synagogue and preached on one Sabbath, which was inspiring, and is a very special figure. But now I understand he's retired. And essentially, I think you are now his successor. Is that correct? Or something like that?
Well, I have been the executive director of the Episcopal Farmworker Ministry for over 2 years now. And, you know, it's just an honor to continue this tradition and to continue these relationships that, you know, the ministry has had for so many years. And as I mentioned to you, one of the first people, one of the first supporters that I spoke with when I first started working was Alice. And so I'll always remember her because I was brand new and she's one of the first people that reached out.
Wonderful. It's wonderful, Lariza. So let's just jump into it here. Tell us, just before we get into the discussion of the ministry specifically, you tell us a little about yourself, like where are you from and kind of how you got maybe on your journey to this position.
Sure. So I'm originally from Colombia. I came here to the United States when I was about 17, 18 years old. And when I was in college, after graduating high school, I went to college. And when I was there, I needed a few credits to be able to study abroad. And so I took what I thought would be the easiest class, which was an internship at a Mexican-American community, and ended up at a farm worker community and just been involved with farm workers ever since. It was a really interesting experience because my perception of the United States was that there wasn't that kind of poverty in the US. And when I came to this community, I found out people didn't know how to read or write. People were really struggling. And so I decided to get involved. And after I graduated college, started working with farm workers. Eventually, my career led me to North Carolina, where I work at Legal Aid of North Carolina. And from there, learned about the farm worker ministry and ended up in this position.
Great, good sense. So tell us a little bit here. So you became involved with legal aid, involved in farm workers already until like in college or right after college. Tell us just a couple questions I want to ask here. First of all, farm workers and agricultural workers, what is the difference? We've been collecting items, we say farm workers, but is there a difference? Does it make a difference in terms of the contributions we do? Tell us about that.
Yes, so I think people use those terms to mean the same group of people sometimes. You know, we consider agricultural workers to be the people who are picking food in the fields, the people who are at packing houses, farms with animals, meat processing plants, nurseries. And so we like to use agricultural workers. Some people like to use farm workers for all of those categories, but it kind of means the same population because people change jobs too. So it might be that, especially here in North Carolina, some people might work doing one thing for one period of time, and then during the agricultural season, they might go back to the fields to pick or to a packing house or to a nursery. And so we're really talking about the same community. The US defines farm workers as somebody who's worked in agriculture for a certain number of years. So what I mean by that is that even if you haven't worked in agriculture for 2 years, you're still considered a farm worker if that's something you've done in the past. And so really the ministry is just trying to work with the immigrant Latin community in rural areas that we know goes back and forth into agriculture.
Got it. So tell us about what the ministry is like in a normal year, what it's usually doing. And again, I had the privilege of actually visiting and seeing a number of years ago. the amazing support you offer. I remember seeing some very basic, very basic housing, you might call it. It was almost like outdoor bunks, wooden. This is what I remember. There was providing of clothing, water, I think other basic, maybe some basic medical needs, I believe. Tell us about what's like in a normal year, and then what's it like under COVID for the workers and for the ministry?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So in a normal year, we work with guest workers, who are the workers you probably were talking about, the migrant workers. And we also work with the seasonal workers, who are the families that live here year-round. We have programs that are specifically tailored for those migrant workers that might be coming from Florida or Georgia or places like Mexico or Guatemala. These are the folks that live here just part of the year during the agricultural season and then go back home. We provide them with a lot of donations, because many times when they get here, there might not be enough work, housing might be really bad, there might not be provided water when they go to work. And so this is kind of like one of the focuses, and I think one of the things that the ministry is known for. We really try to refer cases of abuse to Legal Aid of North Carolina or to other organizations that work on human trafficking issues or that work on labor issues, so that they get the help that they need that we can't provide for them. We really just try to break the isolation and tell them there's help if they need it, and just give them a little hand with some donations that can help them go through a rough time. Now, the programs that we have for the families, the seasonal workers, they're geared towards providing services, community education, empowerment, and advocacy. So we're thinking about the families that live here year-round, that might not get all the information that they need about resources or services that they can access, or about their rights, or about programs that might benefit their children, things like that. And so we have an immigration program, we have a disaster relief program, we have a mental health program, we have a women's group, we have a leadership group. So we have a variety of things that we try to offer the community. On a regular year, the ministry is a place that is always full of people, English classes, events, all kinds of things, people coming in and out. Very active in the late hours of the day, because after people go to work, they can go to the ministry and get involved. But unfortunately, that changed a lot with COVID. So we closed our doors for like regular activities on March 15th of last year. So it's going to be about 1 year very soon. And we have focused more than anything on continuing our programs through Zoom, which was a real challenge in the beginning. But something kind of great did happen, which is that most people have children, and so they had to learn how to use Zoom. And so we supported those people in, strengthening their technology skills. And now we are able to do a lot of our programs, our meetings via Zoom. One example of this is the women's group. They didn't really know what to do in the beginning to continue their group, but they came up with this idea that they could, even though they couldn't see each other, they could share their skills so that they could learn from one another. And so they've been doing classes on how to cook, how to make handmade crafts and stuff like that via Zoom. And so they get together and they share with each other. So where we could never have done that a year ago before the pandemic, now we have access to these people, to a lot more people with technology. We also had to shift our programs. So a lot of our programs are still on hold. We're not doing day trips for children in the community. We're not doing English classes. But we did have to expand our services in terms of like food distribution. We now distribute food to between 200 and 300 families every 2 weeks. Education about COVID, distribution of personal protection equipment, that kind of stuff. We also started an emergency fund And that was a really great experience because when the pandemic first started, we knew it was going to be really hard on the community, as many people didn't qualify for the tax relief. And we started fundraising, and just $20 at a time, we were able to collect $60,000. And so somebody noticed that, and a foundation actually donated $250,000. So we've been able to help over 600 families with financial resources. And these are people who either lost their job because of COVID, or their hours were reduced, or they had unexpected bills because of COVID, or, you know, the applicant died because of COVID. And so, you know, it's been really shifting our programs to like respond to the actual most urgent needs of the community.
Beautiful. So maybe just talk a little bit, because I had the privilege of hearing this some years ago, but maybe just to let everyone know who's watching this. What is an example? You said there are workers, migrant workers, some from Mexico, Guatemala, some obviously from within the United States. What are some of the, what could you give us like a general or examples of some of the typical biographies or typical, it's not portfolio if the term used, like what description of what a farm worker is like in North Carolina or in the Episcopal ministry? What was an example? Is it family, individuals? Is it,
Yeah, it's a great question. Here in the United States, there's like 2-3 million people who identify as farm workers, right? And it's estimated that between 50 to 75% of these workers are undocumented. So we have a large population of migrant workers, especially in states like Florida, you know, California, North Carolina, a lot of immigrant workers that are working in agriculture. And back in the day, we used to get a lot more migrant workers that would come from Florida or from other states, and they would migrate from one state to the other, following, like chasing the crops with their whole families. And they would stay, you know, in different states for a period of time until the harvest was over, and then they would go somewhere else. This has changed a lot in the last years because there has been an explosion in our guest worker program, which is called the H-2A program. And this is a temporary agricultural visa that people can get from certain countries. People can apply and come here and work during the season. In North Carolina, this, like everywhere else in the US, these numbers have been incrementing exponentially. Just to give you an idea, we get about 20,000 migrant workers every year here just in North Carolina. So 20,000 workers that come here to harvest the crops, you know, 20,000 workers that are working on Christmas trees, that are doing a lot of these agricultural jobs. One of the requisites for this program is that these jobs are temporary in nature. So we're not talking about year-long jobs like meat processing plants or tending to animals, but we're talking really about the seasonal agricultural jobs. So these workers that come through these visa program tend to be young men, or I honestly have met less than 5 women that have come with that visa, so they tend to be men. And because of where we are located, most of them tend to be from Mexico.
For a second. So then when you said that there are a significant percentage of undocumented workers, and I want you to understand, according to our Torah, we learn very profoundly in the Bible that we should welcome all into our society, the stranger, the resident, the alien, etc. And while it's a complicated issue, I'm not trying to solve immigration here in our recording. I want to say that, you know, that just because someone does not have documentation does not mean they're not a human being deserving of dignity and proper treatment. So, but I want to be clear then. So then those are undocumented workers, with a majority, it sounds like. Those are ones who originally got here through a visa, perhaps, but then have not returned. Is that typical, or is there another? Am I missing some?
Yeah. Most undocumented workers did not come here with an H-2A visa. They might have come here with, in general, in the US, we have I think it's 11 million undocumented people. Out of that group, most people did come here with a visa originally and overstayed their visa. But in agriculture, there's not as many cases of people who overstay their guest worker visa. And that's because people want to have the flexibility of going back and forth, right? I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. I'm sure it happens, but it's not like the biggest problem with this visa. I think most of the people who are undocumented and are working in agriculture were people who did that. They either crossed the border, or came here with a visa and overstayed. But in my experience, most of the people have shared they crossed the border in one way or another. Usually these are people that are fleeing from violence in their countries or poverty or some type of situation that forced them to make that really hard decision. And it tends to be folks that don't have as much privilege at home to begin with. So people who were farm workers in their own countries, or people who lived in very underserved communities in rural areas. Because people that have more privilege usually end up having jobs that have more privilege here in the US. And so these are the families that we work with, and they tend to have children. Sometimes the whole family is undocumented. Sometimes it's a mixed status family where maybe mom has papers, dad doesn't, and maybe 2 children were born here and 1 wasn't. Or, maybe it's a family where everybody's documented except for 1 parent. We, of course, include workers from meat processing plants because especially now with COVID, we know they're really vulnerable. We heard a lot of stories, and we actually know of workers who got sick at the plant and died because of COVID. So we know that they should be included in the work that we do. And, a lot of the undocumented workers that we work with are working in the fields, but they're also doing other jobs that we don't think about. So feeding the turkey before it's ready to go to the meat processing plant, or feeding cattle, or, weeding the fields before the guest workers get here. It's just a lot of things that we don't usually think about. And again, not every farm worker is undocumented. It's a very diverse population. Just like when you think about your city, there's people that do all kinds of different jobs with all kinds of different backgrounds. The farm worker community is also diverse and rich, and not everybody's in the same situation.
I understand, Lariza, you explained it very well. So let's talk about my synagogue members and how they can help here. For years, we've been involved in providing, usually around this time of year, we have a holiday called Passover. You may be familiar, I'm sure, from the Bible. And it's a time of where we honor the fact that we were once in our history slaves in Egypt, and the heart and the soul of the stranger, and to support others in need. Not to mention the fact that this is, these are people who are working and doing the work to support our economy, really. I mean, without farm workers and agricultural workers, we wouldn't only get the food on our tables, but things would not. There's so many pieces of our economy often hidden from us living maybe in the city that become unpeeled, and we see through this process. So we in the past have given some food, but we've also given some clothing. Tell us about what is helpful in general. What might be particularly helpful because of COVID? There's some additional something. And I'm hearing it here, Alice reminds me that I think we already had a drive at one point where we gave, she's telling me here, we had an emergency crisis fund for COVID relief that Beth Meyer members, my synagogue, gave to. He tells us about that in particular. So just generally about what we can give, what we gave in the past. Love to hear what your thoughts.
Yes, so I think that we have always been blessed to get some in-kind donations that include, as you mentioned, food, clothing. The clothing is particularly important for the guest workers, and especially right now because a lot of the flea markets closed, and that's where they used to buy cheap clothing. There's a big need of long sleeve shirts which protect workers from the sun and pesticides, and those we accept sizes small to large, and also like t-shirts and pants and shoes for men so that we can give them to those workers so they have working clothes. Food is always going to be an issue, but particularly now, it's a big issue. Just to give you an idea, the first time that we did our food distribution after COVID, the line was over 3 miles long. It was actually on Google. You could see the red line. There's so much need right now in the community. Of course, a lot of people, you know, in the beginning, like the farmers didn't want to plant a lot because they didn't know what was going to happen with restaurants closing and everything. So a lot of people lost their jobs. Things have gone more or less back to normal, but there's still a lot of women that had to leave their jobs because of, you know, taking care of children that are not going to school and stuff like that. So food is always a really good donation that we accept. We always need volunteers. If anybody wants to come and volunteer, on the 2nd and 4th Saturday of the month is when we do our food distributions, and we do them drive-through style. So we take a lot of precautions to make sure everybody's healthy and everybody's safe. If they're interested, they can always contact us. Other things, of course, the emergency fund. I mentioned how we got all this money. Well, that money's almost gone. So folks are definitely welcome to make a financial donation for the fund. Out of the group of people that we have helped through this fund, as I mentioned before, some people have passed away. And so we try to give those families $1,000 as opposed to $500, which is the standard help that we give. So any funds for that would be welcome. And then hygiene products, things like shampoo, toothbrushes, deodorant, things like that always help out, especially for the guest workers that come from other countries. There's usually, like I said, a waiting period between the time they come here and the time that they actually get to work. And so it's a period where they don't have any income, and it's sometimes very hard for them to purchase these basic items. And so we like to visit them and welcome them and give them that little help in the hope that it will, you know, make them feel a little bit better and less stressed about the waiting period. What else?
I think basically I have just 2 more questions, really, but they're,
yes.
So what about vaccines? I know farm workers are, I believe, are part of the essential workers, and that I think is the phase we're in now, right? Or what's going on there?
So we're gonna start in March 10th. So right now we're doing teachers, but very soon farm workers are gonna be able to get the vaccine. And so we are actually working really hard to provide education around the vaccine, encourage people to get the vaccine, and hopefully transport workers to the sites of vaccination. So as you know, some vaccines require very cold refrigerators and stuff like that. And so we don't expect that the vaccination will be able to take place at the camps. And so we're very happy to provide these services so workers can access that, those vaccines. We actually have a group of 10 promotores, and promotores are basically farm workers and agricultural workers who have committed to provide education to their peers. And we go to meat processing plants, we go to camps, we go to trailer parks, and they talk to their peers about the vaccine. Most of them have had COVID. I would probably think all of them had COVID already, so they can talk to them about like what it feels like. We also got them vaccinated already because they're doing minority health outreach. And so they can talk about like what it felt when they went to get vaccinated, why people shouldn't be scared. You know, I think as humans, we always listen to our peers more than we listen to anybody else. And so that's the whole, you know, goal of this program.
Wonderful. Okay. Tell us about the relationship you have with the owners of the farms themselves, right? Because I imagine the owners of farms themselves, they need this labor. They I assume on some level, I don't want to overstate it, but I must appreciate this, that they have these workers on a regular basis coming from primarily Mexico, but even across the United States, just to help. This is their farms will not succeed without their, you know, enormous labor. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you know, clearly there are people struggling. It's not, I don't know what the term is, but it's not enough of a living wage. It does not enough of us. Without you all, it appears that most people would fall through the cracks. There'd be a lot of danger. People would return, perhaps, at very least, if not, sadly get sick, and other problems could occur. So it sounds like you're helping, but you must also find that sometimes the owners, maybe they're not paying enough, or they're not as nice enough, or God forbid they're doing wage theft, right? So am I describing the relationship? Is it complicated? As you noted here in a few different ways, this community is giving tremendous support to the American economy. It's putting food on the table of our congregants who will watch this video, and making sure that our society is able to sustain itself. And yet this kind of hidden group, very vulnerable, has sadly abused or taken advantage of and at risk. And without people in the front lines like yourself and Episcopal Farmworkers, even more vulnerable. So we want to say God bless you for all the wonderful work you're doing. We feel privileged that we've been in connection with the Farmworker Ministry for a number of years, thanks to Alice. And God willing, please God, vaccines and improved work, and hopefully this will continue this relationship together. I'm going to give from, I've called a Rabbi's Discretionary Fund, an opportunity to give charitable dollars the congregation supports. We have our drive that comes up around Passover for some of the items you discussed, as well as contributions. And we're going to hold you in our prayers also.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate it. And just so you know, one thing we tell the workers in the community all the time is that there's only 6 staff people in our organization, but behind us, there's hundreds of people like you. And, we couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you all so much for the support that you have given the ministry throughout the years. It really means a lot to us, but it means a lot more to the workers and the families that have been able to get involved and that have been able to get help thanks to your generosity and your support and your solidarity. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Truly, it's our privilege. All right, so we'll wrap up our conversation here, and I'll stop the recording. Thank you. Gracias.
Oh, no, thank you so